Welcome to Horror Makes Us Happy, the podcast where we ask the question, what is it about horror that makes us happy? Your hosts are Steve Becker and myself, Chris Whitman, and you can find out more about us at our website, horrormakesushappy.com. Before we get started, this is the trigger warning. This is a horror podcast, so we're going to be potentially discussing some disturbing subjects, so there could be discussions about things like child abuse, F-bomb, rape, bad things. We're going to talk about bad things, so there's the warning. Steve, what do we have coming up?
Coming up, we've got about 12 different people on the calendar, so I'm not going to list them all. Number of authors, 2 actors, I think, and a director. Chris's webcomic Pieces, piecesoflesh.com. My book, A Guide to the Recovery Toolbox, currently has a coupon code LE69E at smashwords.com.
Nice.
It's got 80 tools that I have learned through recovery, counseling, 12-step stuff, all that kind of stuff. Good stuff if you're interested into that. Today, we're talking to somebody who, if you are a fan of horror, probably needs no introduction, but we'll give one anyway. Chris Sarandon, for the wider audience, probably best known for roles in The Princess Bride and the voice of Jack Skellington. But for the horror audience, probably best known for Fright Night, Child's Play, and The Resurrected. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Please, yes, my pleasure.
I don't know how much chit-chat there was about the theme of what we do here, but basically we break it down into 4 sections. It's childhood, teenage years, and adulthood, talking more about what you were a fan of, less about your body of work, and then a wrap-up section at the end where we maybe talk about any common themes that or common threads that keep coming up in the conversation.
Great.
So, starting with childhood, what are some of your earliest memories of scary things?
Oh gosh, everything was scary to me when I was a kid. I think I share this with a lot of people. I think,
yeah, it's not uncommon.
But a very specific memory I have is I lived in a small town, and the movie theater was maybe 3 blocks away from my house, at the top of the hill where most of the businesses were, and also my father's restaurant was up there as well. And we had 2 movie theaters in the town. One was called the Palace, of course, and one was called the Beckley Theater because it was the name of the town, Beckley, West Virginia. And I remember very vividly a showing of The Thing. Now, I'm going back.
The original.
To the 50s, the original Christian Nyby directed, and in reality, probably Robert Wise helped out a lot. He was the producer of record. Christian Nyby was the director of record, but the movie, I think, shows a lot of touches of Robert Wise, who was one of our great American directors who directed West Side Story, the original movie of West Side Story. And at any rate, my town was a very safe place to live. I was allowed to go out and hang out with my friends. And on this particular evening, I think some friends and I went to see The Thing.
As you do.
And after the movie, I walked home alone because my friends and I split up. They went to their various homes. And all I had to do was just walk down a hill to my house. It was actually a kind of apartment home, was what we called them. They were sort of all connected. My father owned it with my uncle. And there were a number of condominiums in a row. And I remember vividly walking down the hill, and as I walking faster and faster, it was dark. And I knew that The Thing was behind me. And he was coming after my ass. And from that day forward until I had to be in my mid-teens, he came and visited me every night. I would lie in bed. I would literally pull the covers up over my head so that he couldn't see me, of course. That's a ridiculous conceit in the first place.
No, it's out of sight, out of mind. They're gone.
Yeah, right, exactly. And it was, I think in many ways, the creature was a kind of a personification of some of the things that I was kind of holding inside me. Some of maybe some of the tension that existed in my household. My father and mom were at odds at times. The actual figure of my father was the kind of the overreaching kind of fear influence in my life at that time. He was not an abusive man to me, but he was to my mom, and I became sort of in the middle of all that.
Right.
And I think that The Thing was a way of my projecting out into the world these fears that I had of what was going on in the household and the tensions, the internal stuff that I just didn't let out.
Right.
And I still remember the movie vividly. And when I watch it, I go back to that time in my life.
Was this like a recurring nightmare or dream,
Yeah,
or like a
yeah.
sleep paralysis thing, like the
Both.
person in the corner kind of deal?
All three, all
Yeah.
four, all five.
It's all of them, whatever number it is. All of them.
Exactly. This thing was, and what the brilliance of the movie was that it's not what you saw, but what you didn't see
Yeah.
that was frightening. I think we've lost a lot of that in modern horror movies, but there are directors who work like that, and those are the ones that I admire the most.
Right. Some of our guests have spoken of a dividing line where prior to this, they were afraid of horror, and after it, they learned to enjoy it or find some pleasure in it. Was there ever that kind of line for you?
I never went back to a horror movie after that until I was, way in my adult life.
Okay.
Yeah. And even then, I'm an easy scare. I mean, you'll ask my wife, we'll be sitting and watching something that is not necessarily does not have a great horror component. But if there's a jump scare, she moves out of my vicinity because she knows.
Just get out of striking range.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Oh, because she knows that I'm just going to start.
Well, that's a good thing.
I'm a major easy scare. It's interesting. You guys might know a director named Mike Flanagan.
Yes.
I just did a podcast with Mike, who's a lovely, lovely man. And, I asked him because he's I think an extraordinary filmmaker. I said to him, considering his background, which was that he grew up in a fairly, not necessarily a settled home because they moved a lot. His dad was in the Coast Guard, but that the family dynamic was very strong. They sat around the table and they talked about their day and they shared things and, everything that my family didn't really do. And I said, well, why horror, Mike? And he said, well, I grew up afraid of a lot of things. And just as you intimate to me when you said, did I lose that sense of being scared? But Mike said, the more I watched, the more, if you want to call it, agency I had in terms of not being afraid, because I was afraid of a lot of other things. I was afraid that my father, who was at sea a lot, his father was in the Coast Guard, that he wasn't coming home, that we had to move again. There were a number of things that I was afraid of, and the horror helped me get over that.
Yep.
And that's something that Mike says that he hopes that his films are able to do for people as well, both entertain and in a way exorcise that,
or invigorate, strengthen. What's for here?
Empower. You're touching on something that, so there's sort of two things that we're doing here. Short term, any of your fans who listen to this stuff might get something interesting out of the conversation. Long term, we're hoping, not everybody's going to be exactly the same. People are going to fall into a certain number of buckets. The question is, how many buckets are there? What are they? Can we start identifying trends, like that kind of thing? So that is definitely part of what we're trying to do here. But again, that's the long-term stuff.
Well, but good for you that you have a more far-reaching objective.
Thank you.
In your show.
So other than The Thing, any other media jump out to you as being, strong influence? From my childhood, no, because I refused to go back.
that was the line itself.
Yeah, I was going to watch a lot of musicals and a lot of happy movies. I was not going back to see her.
Several years long palate cleanser.
Yeah, exactly.
I think real quick, I just want to say I think it's funny that you bring up Mike Flanagan directly after The Thing, because looking up and reminding myself of what the creature in The Thing looked like, it definitely reminds me of Moonlight Man in Gerald's Game. If you've seen that film,
yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. A lot of similarities.
Very possible he got some inspiration from The Thing.
Quite possibly.
Maybe.
Yeah. I watched that film before I had a chance to talk to Mike. I watched that and Midnight Mass, which is just brilliant.
Yeah.
It's just brilliantly done.
The next two questions I'm going to ask you are a pair. I'm going to start with the negative one first so we can end on the positive. The negative one being, do you remember the first person you hurt? And you don't have to answer it if you don't want to. It's just...
Yeah.
Pass is an option.
Golly, I was very careful as I was growing up, because I was I think a pretty sensitive kid, that I also had empathy, particularly for people who were outsiders, because I was in a way, an outsider. I was a Greek American. My father was an immigrant. My mother was the child of immigrants, and they spoke Greek at home and actually in public as well when they were communicating with each other. And so I had a very strong sense of feeling other, even though I figured out a way to become popular. I had a lot of friends, and ultimately I, got through my elementary and junior high and high school years as a fairly popular kid. But there was always something of the other sort of hanging back in my psyche. And so I can't recall going out of my way to hurt somebody. I may have inadvertently, but then are we aware of when we hurt someone inadvertently anyway, unless we're made aware of it?
Right. Not usually at a young age now.
Yeah. So I don't necessarily see it as a great, a wonderful part of my personality, because I was constantly sort of, trying to scope out situations. And I guess one of the reasons probably why I became an actor.
Your answer still gives us something interesting about you.
Yeah. So I can't think of it, because I do remember that I was hurt several times as I was growing up. There was a kid in elementary school who bullied me, and I was terrified of him. It wasn't a horror movie, but it was a horror movie in my head, because I was fantasizing exactly what he was going to do to me, as opposed to what he said he was going to do to me. And what was in my head was always worse.
Of course. Do you remember the first person you helped?
Oh, golly. No, not really. Okay. I don't remember the first person I helped. I do remember that again, going back to that facet of my personality of being somebody who, was on guard and observant about when other people were hurt, so that I was a kind of kid who was helpful to people, to people who were in some emotional difficulty or whatever. Again, I don't consider it a perfect trait, because I did it at my own expense. But no, I can't really think of a very specific person. No.
Not every question is going to land. You never know.
Yeah.
Do you remember any time in your childhood when you felt completely calm or safe or at bliss?
Yes. Watching, or actually first, because we were late to get a television set where I lived, and we listened to a lot of radio. And I'm talking, because I was born in 1942, so I'm talking the 1940s when radio was everywhere, and that there was a lot of wonderful, creative drama as well as comedy on the radio. So I remember very, very vividly in my, say in the mid-late 40s, we'd spread an Afghan, a rug that's been crocheted or knitted, out in front of we had a big Zenith radio and record player that was the size of half the size of our house. And I would lie in front of it and listen to a program called The Shadow, whose log line was, "Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men?"
Yep, there it is.
The Shadow knows. And the FBI in Peace and War. And there was a program called Luigi, with a famous character actor named J. Carroll Nash playing this Italian sort of airhead guy. The Jack Benny Show. Jack Benny was a famous American comedian from that time. And the extraordinary thing about that experience was that you could, for instance, Jack Benny was very famous. He did a wonderful take when somebody would talk about money, because he was legendarily, at least the character that he played, that he was a cheapskate. He was a miser. And whenever anybody would say anything about his spending money, he would always do a take, but it was something that you couldn't see, you could hear. And it was hysterical. And there's no way to explain it except to know that the imagination is very powerful.
Yeah. It's an extraordinary skill of acting. If you can do a take, like a facial expression that you have to express through radio. That
the audience can sense.
Yes.
And so my imagination was really peaked at that time in my life, because I didn't have anything to see. I had to see it in my head.
Right.
And then after a while, so that was one of the times when I think I was totally content. And then when television came, my favorite television show, and I don't know if some of your listeners know of this or not, there was a show called Your Show of Shows, which starred a man named Sid Caesar. And the writers in that show were Mel Brooks, Woody Allen, Neil Simon, a guy by the name of Larry Gelbart, who created MASH, and I'm forgetting somebody. But at any rate, it was like this extraordinary group. Oh, and Carl Reiner.
Yes.
And it was an anarchic kind of almost virtually improvisational comedy show. Essentially, what they did was they created the kind of template for these skits. And then the actors, these extraordinary actors, would just go. They would speak in foreign languages, but they were pidgin languages. They weren't real.
Right.
And you were convinced that they were speaking the language, except that they would throw English words in for emphasis, particularly on laugh lines. Brilliant, brilliant comics. And I remember sitting in front of the television and being literally paralyzed with laughter. And there was something about that, again, that escape into that world of this wild kind of improvisational comedy that just, it spoke to me. Okay. And I think it spoke to me for the rest of my life, because I ended up, after I finished, if you want to call it drama school, I was in a theater program getting my master's degree, but it was a performing program. And after I finished it, I had a year of working with an improv company in Washington, D.C. And there was something about that training, because we would do experimental plays at night for audiences, and then we'd also do improv with the audience.
Okay.
And the guy who ran the company was trained by a woman named Viola Spolin, who was the mother of a guy by the name of Paul Sills, who Paul Sills created The Second City. And all of the various iterations that were spawned from that. And they were all theater games that this woman, Paul Sills' mother, created for kids, essentially. And we did these games both with adults in our nighttime program, and then we also worked in the day. We did plays for kids in elementary, junior high, and high schools.
Okay.
And we would do a one-act play called The Marriage Proposal, which is a play by Anton Chekhov, and then talk to the kids about the play. And then we do improv with the kids. And kids are fundamentally, particularly kids who are unsophisticated, who are not sitting around going, oh, you know what, I'm too cool to do this. They're brilliant at improv. And we got a chance to work with them, and that was a transcendent experience as well, to be in the middle of an improv with a 6-year-old, and he's better than you.
Yes.
Bit of a savant there.
Yeah, yes. So those are the kind of the touchstones that I think of when I was happiest, and of course it was obviously had to do with either storytelling or performing, and that's how I ended up where I am today.
Not a bad thing to do.
Yeah.
No,
did you participate in Halloween as a child?
I did as a child, yes. Although as a grown-up, my children, I have 3 kids who are now grown and have children. But my children were always disappointed in me because I didn't dress up during Halloween when I was a grown-up. And they kept saying, Daddy, why don't you dress up?
You're like, I do this all day for work.
And, yeah, exactly. I say I do Halloween for a living.
Yes.
I don't have to.
Yeah.
Besides, this is your day to dress up.
Yes, exactly.
I chaperone.
But I know, we all know many, many adults for whom Halloween is a highlight of their year. Yes.
Present.
Did you have a favorite costume when you were a kid?
I think a lot of it had to do with, I had an older brother. And when my brother was around, we would kind of dress in tandem. I remember once we dressed as gypsies when I was a kid.
Okay.
I also, my mother put me into a kindergarten that was also a dance school.
Okay.
And I was one of the only boys in in the dance school. So I have a lot of pictures of me with like surrounded by 6 girls, which was, I guess, the beginning of a wonderful time in my life.
I was going to say that age, but
but boys,
you get
generally,
the skills. Yeah.
I was always, always had a girlfriend when I was growing up. And so I think a lot of it had to do with what we decided to do when we were, my brother and I were going to do in tandem when we went out to trick or treat. I was much younger. I was 6 years younger than he. But that was, that's the one I remember. I can't remember anything else, specifically, other than I do remember, that it was great fun.
Do you remember a least favorite costume?
No.
Okay. Was there anybody else in your family who were fans of horror?
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, when you think about it, coming from an immigrant family, they were familiar enough with horror in their own lives so that I don't think that horror was an escape for them.
Right.
My dad grew up dirt poor and was literally sent away from home when he was 13 years old to work in a bakery with an uncle in a different country in with a language that he didn't understand. And he worked there for like 8 years.
Can relate to that.
Yeah. So, and during a war.
Yeah.
So, horror was something that was, I think, very familiar to them.
Yeah. My father's side of the family was Polish, and on that side of the family in Poland, going back far enough, the families just did subsistence farming. They didn't farm with the idea of making more to sell. It's just enough to live on.
Yeah.
And so if the crops failed, you were screwed.
Oh yeah.
And there was one branch of the family that had a decently sized farm, and a number of other relatives in the family would send their kids to this aunt and uncle to help for them to, keep them as hands on the farm, feed them. And then when they're 18, they said, okay, you got to go, because we got another cousin here who needs a mouth feed to be fed. You got to go so we can get this one in.
It's, when you think about it, we are so privileged, at least in the United States and in most of the countries of the developing world, in that these are concerns that we, there are obviously sizable portions of our population, too many of them, do have to worry about what they're going to eat when they get up in the morning. But most of us don't.
Yeah. And
not only that, but, we're also witnessing a war in which there are people who not only don't know what they're going to eat when they get up in the morning, but don't know if they're going to have a home.
Right.
Don't know if they're going to be alive. So there are horrors enough in this world, I think.
True. Talking about teenage years, you did mention that you kind of bypassed it, horror into your adult years, and that is not uncommon. That we've talked to other people that was the same for as well.
Usually ebbs and flows. Interest in childhood, not so much in teenage, more a parental thing in adulthood.
Yeah.
You mentioned you had this recurring dream about The Thing. Did that continue into teenage years?
Into my mid-teens. I was afraid of the dark for a long time, actually, after that. Even into my adult years. I remember when I was in my 20s, in my first marriage, we had a little house up in north of New York City, and there was a power outage. And I remember I had to go into the basement to make sure that it wasn't the fuse box that was out, that it was an actual power outage for the entire area, because the house was a little separated from the neighbors' houses and we couldn't really see them. And there was nobody else there but me. And I knew I had to go to the basement. And I was scared shitless. My mid-20s, okay? And finally I just said, and actually this is kind of what Mike was talking about too, is that I went into the basement and I just said, you know what? Fuck this.
Exactly. You know
I'm going to stay here until it's gone. And I went down to the basement and I just stood there.
Faced your fears.
Yeah. And I had all sorts of, there was a lot of kind of memory coming at me, particularly of this event earlier in my life. And I just kept breathing and I just kept looking around, and actually the dark became clearer. It became more knowable.
Yeah.
And once it's knowable, then it can be dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
And from that time onward, I had no more fear of the dark. And it's a sort of seminal moment in my life.
Good. It's interesting that you even kind of touched on it, because I was, as you say, you being afraid of the dark into your 20s is probably not that common, and I was wondering what that might have been, and you kind of alluded to that you had these memories come up. That it's good that you were able to face them.
Yeah.
Is it something you feel like comfortable sharing or no?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, why are we here?
No, I mean what the memories were
of what
that came up when you were down there in the dark.
Oh, it just particularly that time earlier in my life when I was afraid of the dark and covering my head with the covers, and I would literally go into a kind of, sort of fugue state where I imagined that I had risen above the bed, and somehow and I was kind of wrapped up so that would keep me safe. And it was almost I guess it was a sort of cross between a meditation and a kind of, I don't know. I just
sounds like it worked.
It kept me safe, but it kept coming back too. It didn't leave me, so it didn't necessarily stop the fear.
Yeah. I don't think it's really that uncommon to have an adult's fear of the dark, or fear of what was it you were discussing earlier, where you felt that there was someone behind you. To this day, when walking down either an alley or a hallway, I know in 100% of my rational mind that there is nothing behind me, but I just get a physical feeling and a presence of some force from behind me. It almost like quickens your pace, makes you move along a little quicker.
Yeah, maybe exactly.
The answer is to just face your demons and sit in there for a minute with it.
Yeah.
The thing that I'm thinking about is relating also to my own experiences. When I lived in Wisconsin, my father and his second wife, it was not a good relationship. And at that time, I was in grade school, so third, fourth grade or younger, sometime between kindergarten and like third or fourth grade. And I used to get pounding migraines, like, seeing colors and things like that. And fortunately, we had a basement that was very cold and very dark. And I found that it was helpful for me to go down into the dark, and that would help me, calm down and ease these, the migraines. And I'm wondering if this, maybe was tied into, because you had said something about, your father wasn't abusive to you, but was towards women potentially. And I'm wondering if maybe something was going on, and you just said, let me go to my bed or go to a dark place to get away from this and drama. And, maybe I could see that being a situation as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
In your teen years, moments of being completely calm or safe or at bliss in your teen years?
The teen years would continue with particularly the watching comedy.
Okay.
And getting lost in that kind of feeling of almost comic euphoria, particularly with that show that I was a big fan of. I think it ran for a number of years, and anything like it after, I remember being very much in love with when I was growing up. And also, I had when I was in high school, I was, aside from being a good student, I was also I was in a rock band.
Oh. Okay.
And I played the drums. I just decided I wanted to play the drums, and it was reasonably musical. I sang in the church choir. I was an altar boy. And so I had that kind of ritual in my life, which made me feel calm. And also playing the drums, sitting behind a group of other musicians, and we became, kind of the it band around our area, and we made some records, and we toured the sort of the eastern part of like West Virginia, South Carolina, that area, Ohio. We also played with some, at the time, people who were relatively major figures in the music world. And that was a time of great kind of feeling. Particularly, music has a great power of calm and healing.
It really does.
Even rock and roll.
Yeah.
Even
especially
the blues.
Rock and roll.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I play guitar and bass.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And there's nothing like being part of a unit. And I felt that with singing in the church choir. singing in harmony. When I was in college, I just for the hell of it, did something called choral union, where anybody could go, and for like I think it was a couple of hours a week, the conductor did very challenging pieces with people from the music department, but also people from the general student body. And we did, if any of your listeners are familiar with any of these pieces, but we did the Verdi Requiem, we did the Mozart Requiem, we did the Carmina Burana that this guy Carl Orff wrote. That's a wonderful piece. That's just, and to sing with 200 people and to sing in harmony, there's something about that vibration that occurs between human beings that is, it's exhilarating.
Yes. Yeah, a lot of people who, if you've never sung in a group before, there's something very interesting where it can even happen just between two people, but like you say, with 200, it's even more powerful. But when you get two people together and you hit the right note and the right harmony, just right, your whole body vibrates. Yes,
it moves through your body. That's right. Yeah, it's really, and I keep, I have a grandson who's 12 years old. I have 9 grandkids. And my grandson has a lovely singing voice, but he won't go out and use it. And I keep saying to him, you're missing an experience that you will never have in your life if you don't do it now, if you don't just jump in. And it's about, being a 12-year-old kid, a boy particularly, and not wanting to be seen as what? Effeminate? I'm not sure what it is, but I'm going to keep at him. Because it was a great part of my life when I was growing up, particularly when I was a teenager and college and then onward.
There are bullies who will find anything to bully about regardless. And so the lesson he may need to learn is about, how to defend yourself about bullies in general. And then specifically learning how to apply it in that situation.
Exactly.
Moving into adult years, you had mentioned that, so you kind of came back to horror as an adult. Was it because of work first, or did you find it as a fan first?
I was always interested in movies for most of my life. From the time I really went to college, I was a big fan of what we call now Americana roots music, but at the time was basically, I lived in West Virginia. So when I went to college, there was a professor who went up into the hills and recorded people singing, playing a 2 or 3 string dulcimer or a banjo or whatever the family instrument was.
Yep, that sounds.
And awesome. He would lug a tape recorder up into the hollers of West Virginia, and then come back and play these songs, and then show us songs that were written back in the 10th century that came from Norse songs, that became Celtic songs, that became, whatever, and that were passed down through an oral tradition. And that really fascinated me because I was able to link that with my background and the fact that roots music is not so different in different cultures. If you listen to music from Greece and Turkey and from the part of the world that my father came from, it's not so different from the music that was played up in the hills of West Virginia.
Yeah,
that was something that interested me, and then also I became interested in art films and foreign films and stuff that was a little more esoteric than what was coming through the kind of the general pipeline. And so I was always a big fan of movies. Okay. And I would seek out movies of great directors. And I remember being exposed to, vividly seeing a Nick Rogue movie called Don't Look Now, which is Donald Sutherland, Julie Christie, about a couple whose child died and they go to Venice and they think they see the child. And it's one of the scariest movies I've ever experienced in my life. And it has nothing to do with the sort of common jump scare, the common dismemberment of of a character in the movie.
Right. Supernatural.
It was all about what you think you see and you don't see. And and intimations of that, and the haunting, essentially, because what happens is that this child ends up being in the minds of the parents a haunting, and it's beautifully directed and really scary.
Yeah.
And then much later, Let the Right One In. That great Eastern European movie.
Yeah.
That's just, I think, the greatest vampire movie of all time, next to Nosferatu. And I was also interested in, because I saw Nosferatu, the original Murnau, and the original Dracula movies, which were, again, much more, for want of a better term that you just used, supernatural.
Yeah.
Although Dracula was a horror movie, the Frankenstein movies, I was always a big fan of all the Frankenstein movies.
Did you not see those until you were an adult?
Yeah,
okay.
Not until I was an adult. Yeah, they didn't show where I lived,
okay.
and I became a big fan of all the James Whale movies and the extensions of those movies. I'm just trying to think of the other ones. Can't think of anything right off the top of my head, but those are the ones that come to mind.
Yeah, I think often when we talk about a particular movie, like, for example, Let the Right One In, is there a particular scene that jumps to mind as being impactful to you?
I haven't seen that movie probably in 20 years, if it's that old.
Okay.
I think it is.
Yeah, I think it is. So I don't remember exactly. In fact, I just bought it on the Criterion Collection and want to watch it again because I haven't seen it in so long. So okay. I'm glad you reminded me. I need to watch it.
All right.
Well, thank you for informing me. I have one to add to my own Criterion collection now.
Yeah. I have a huge collection of Criterion movies.
What about Nosferatu or Dracula? Is there a particular scene that jumps out to you?
Just the character itself, just Nosferatu, just the existence of that character in every scene is so freaking creepy.
Mm-hmm.
And Klaus Kinski, I think, no, that's not Klaus Kinski. That's the later one. That's the Herzog Nosferatu, right?
I'll defer to Chris on that.
I think so.
But the original, whoever the original Nosferatu was so bloody. Just, I get a little frisson every time I think of it, actually.
Yeah. It's like nowadays, they're just so, I don't want to, throw shade or anything, but there seem to be fewer far between 100% great films, to the point where when I'm watching something sometime and somebody just does a great job, like Nosferatu, I just point at the screen. I'm like, acting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Exactly.
Which kind of pulls you out of it, but still, it's
gonna ask this pair again now for adult years. Again, starting with the negative one first. Do you remember the last person you hurt?
I can think of times that I've been hurt, but I can't think of the last person. I'm sure that somewhere along the way I've hurt somebody's feelings inadvertently, but often we're not aware of having hurt someone's feelings.
Okay. Do you remember the last person you helped?
Yeah, my kids.
Okay.
I help my kids all the time.
That's a good one.
Let's see. We already talked about Halloween. You don't dress up for that. Anything terrify you in real life as an adult?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I actually remember being frightened about a year and a half ago, and this is not something that I talk about with any interest in anybody feeling sorry for me, because it was a time that 1 in 3 Americans go. It's something that 1 in 3 Americans, anyway, people in the world, I guess, go through. I got a cancer diagnosis.
Okay,
and when I first heard the word cancer, a chill obviously ran through me, and I started going through. And this was, by the way, a diagnosis that was fairly positive, in the sense that the diagnosis was for something that had not spread. It was a very early stage of this particular kind of cancer. It was easily taken care of, but just the fact that it was there.
Right.
Yeah.
I often think about that. Just to hear, you don't know exactly how you're going to react until you hear the words.
Yeah. And also, it's very interesting how other people's reaction to hearing it affects how they relate to you.
Yeah.
Because generally speaking, everybody was going, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. My thoughts are with you. I hope that," and all that, kind of talking around it. And I had something happen that was extraordinary, thinking back on it. I had to have a follow-up ultrasound because the surgeon who was going to go in and take it out needed to know if there were any lymph glands involved, etc. So he sent me in for another ultrasound, and I went in to the ultrasound room, and a young woman came in, obviously the technician, and she's looking at my chart, and she looks at my chart, and she says, "Oh yeah, you, Chris Sarandon?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "You have thyroid cancer," and I just for a minute, that kind of, that intake of breath where you just go, "What the? Somebody just said it," and then once I let that go, I realized that's what it is. Why is everybody talking around it? For God's sake. She's just telling me what she sees on this piece of paper. It has nothing to do with wanting to make me feel one way or another. And in fact, what it did was, once I got over the kind of shock of her actually saying it out loud, it was liberating because it was out there.
Right, because then it's quantifiable. You know what it is.
And then I can own it.
Yeah.
And then she sat down and she literally talked me through the ultrasound. She said, "Well, here's where it is. And it looks like, I don't see anything around here. I don't see anything over here." I mean, it was very reassuring in a lot of ways. Not everybody gets that kind of diagnosis, but the fact is that it allowed me to, as you say, to own it. And it was an extraordinary experience, and the follow-up was amazing as well.
The phrase "putting the name on it" reminded me of the experience you shared about being in the basement.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yep.
Some synchronicity there.
So
the next two questions I'm going to ask are going to cover your entire life, and it's not just about horror. I'll give you the two questions at the same time because it could be the same answer for both or two different answers. The first question being, what movie have you watched more times than any other? And then second question being, what would you consider your favorite movie?
I would say I have several favorites. I've mentioned actually two of them. One of them I have to go back and, well, actually both of them I have to go back and watch again. But I have to say that I have, anytime it comes on, I think all of us can say that we'll sit down and watch The Godfather again. I don't know if you guys would, but I would.
I would. The first one.
Yeah, the first one. Actually, I would watch two as well.
Two was good too.
I would watch any number of times. I would watch How Green Was My Valley. I would watch the great John Ford. Again, John Ford, The Searchers. I'd probably watch that any number of times, and I'd watch it ad nauseum. Again, I'm a huge John Ford fan. Oh, gosh. I mean, there are so many great films in American film history.
I find that usually the first two or three things that come to mind for a reason.
Yeah.
I think we could probably guess some good reasons for The Godfather, but I'm not familiar with the other two. Why would you?
How Green Was My Valley. Also starred, by the way, one of the stars of Fright Night.
Okay.
Roddy McDowall.
Oh, Roddy McDowall was in this one.
Yeah, Roddy McDowall played. And you guys have never seen How Green Was My Valley? You better after this, because it's about a small Welsh mining town, shot entirely in the hills of California, by the way, with Roddy, a wonderful actor named Walter Pidgeon, a wonderful actress named Maureen O'Hara, Donald Crisp, the great character actor from the 30s, 40s, 50s, a woman by the name of Sarah Allgood, another amazing actress. And it's just about this family and this young boy growing up there. Roddy McDowall at the time was, I think, 6 or 7 years old, maybe a little older.
Oh.
I don't know if it was his first film. And it's heartbreaking because it's about the fact that we all, at some point, have to grow up.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And the disillusion that comes with that, the realization that we're mortal when we lose members of our family. I'm welling up talking about it, interestingly. And also The Searchers, just for the sheer moving-making brilliance of it. And it's tough to watch, The Searchers. It's about two guys who are out looking for a relative of theirs who was captured by the Native Americans, the Indians, many years before, and they're sure she's still alive. and so they're looking for her, and it's a saga, one of the most brilliantly shot movies ever. There's so many of these films, guys, I could talk about, but I'm drawing a blank because there are too many.
Yeah, understood.
No, like you said, the first two or three that come to mind. I think we've got those.
Yeah.
The Searchers to me looks very similar to, or sounds very similar to Bone Tomahawk in the plot anyway. Just searching for the rescued party. If that would.
I think this was what's the one that you mentioned?
Bone Tomahawk. It's more recent, like last 10 years or so.
Oh, then I think it's probably a remake of The Searchers.
Could be.
That or at very least inspired by it.
Yeah.
In terms of going back to the horror conversation, do you see any common thread about what kinds of horror you like? Cannibalism, occult, metaphysical, supernatural?
I like horror that, as I think said originally about the way that The Thing was directed. I like horror that leaves more to your imagination. That it makes you think about what could be happening that you're not seeing. Mm-hmm. Because I think that the imagination is much more vivid. One's imagination is much more vividly, we always, I think, we think that something worse is going to happen than actually happens. Mm-hmm. And so that's the kind, it's one of the reasons why I became literally overnight a huge Mike Flanagan fan, because everything that I've watched of his, he harkens to me back to the great filmmakers of the 30s, 40s, and then into the 70s and 80s, the golden ages of American cinema, when it's what you didn't see that really make you think. And also that there are thematically things going on that are beyond just the dismemberment of somebody or someone being attacked and being surprised and being shocked. Mm. That the shock is also tied to the fact that you are involved in the characters.
Right.
I think that's one of the brilliant things about Fright Night, the Tom Holland Fright Night, is that Tom invested from the very beginning. When I first read that script, I said, all of these characters are vividly drawn. And so you care about them. Mm-hmm. You care about Evil Ed. So that's why that amazing scene where Jerry Dandridge says to Evil Ed, nobody will ever bully you again. Mm-hmm. I'll take care of you, is so powerful.
Yeah, it really helps when you identify with your characters.
Oh, like absolutely. And everybody's felt that way. Yeah. I think, growing up, that they were somehow, we talked about this earlier, that we are the other, rather than being part of what we consider to be the cool crowd. Right. So those are the movies that really stay with me. The people who do it, there's that scene that you talked about earlier. I can't remember if it was Chris or Steve, about the scene in Gerald's Way.
Oh yeah.
Of seeing that figure in the shadow when the woman is handcuffed to the bed and she thinks does she see it? Does she not see it? It's not totally clear that there's something there, but at the same time, the imagination provides.
Exactly.
Oh, it was
it's
so
the horror of your own imagination. The horror and power of your own imagination.
Oh my God.
Brief tangent, but I'm surprised that we've on this topic of leaving more to your imagination. I'm surprised we've gotten this far in the call and not talked about Hitchcock.
Oh,
absolutely. Yeah. The master of that. Mm-hmm.
Is that why we didn't talk about it? Because it's too obvious?
Probably. Yeah, probably.
It was all in our imagination.
Yeah, and there are any number of Hitchcock movies that I could watch over and over, except for Vertigo.
Do you have issues with Vertigo?
Nah, I'm just not a big fan of Vertigo, and I'm also not a big Kim Novak fan. So, but that's that's just my. We all have subjective tastes.
Yes,
indeed.
But from if you want to talk about horror movies, Psycho, I could watch Psycho over and over again.
Right. So this is the point in the call where I'm going to bring up the things that I think are common reoccurring themes, and then we can talk about that for a little bit.
Sure.
The two things that I'm hearing coming up the most are emotion and escape. Mm-hmm. Obviously, identifying with other people, being empathic, and then the escape into imagination. I'm wondering, maybe even partially as a response to the length of the empathy, that feeling like I need to escape because I can't, like, this is too much.
Yeah actually, good point.
So then I think it's obvious why those things are important to you. So the next question after that would be, why horror? Couldn't you explore some of these things in other genres? And in your case, maybe you have, because I've seen your IMDb list. So maybe.
Do you have anything in particular in mind?
No, but I mean.
Well, okay. We talked about A Tale of Two Cities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I had the great good fortune of being cast as both Charles Darnay and Sidney Carton in that movie. Now, for those of your listeners who are not familiar with the great Charles Dickens book, A Tale of Two Cities, the basic plot is that it's a matter of one character who is in need of redemption, taking the place of another character in order that that character might live and live on with the woman that the man who takes his place is in love with as well.
Okay.
That's the sort of central plot line of the story, but it also takes place during the French Revolution.
Yes.
Which is a much bigger canvas. And it has great resonance for me when you talk about empathy and caring for characters, because here we have the one character, Charles Darnay, who is a dissolute, drunk. His life is, he talks about, and there's a phrase that he uses that is so heartbreaking. I keep it written down somewhere so that I can remember it, and I don't have it in front of me. But he talks about the fact that he's a lost cause,
mm-hmm.
that he'll never be any better than he is at that moment. And he's saved, in a way, initially by his love for this woman, because he wants to be a good person for her. So he stops drinking, he straightens himself up, he starts actually hanging out with the woman and her husband and their child. And then the husband, Charles Darnay, has to go back to France because someone who was a loyal servant of his when he was growing up has been arrested, and he has to save him. So Charles goes back and is arrested as an aristocrat and is sentenced to death.
Right.
And Carton decides to try to save him, and essentially hatches a plan in which he takes his place at the guillotine. And that's the crowning moment of the picture. And he ends up saying, as he's about to be executed, it's a far, far better thing that I have ever done. It's a far, far better place I go to than I have ever known.
I've heard this quote, but never knew the full context.
Oh yeah, it's the final quote of the book and of the movie, and he's guillotined. And he does it in full realization that his life is over, but that he's living for a higher purpose.
Mm.
And I think that redemption is a common theme in all films. It's a common theme in horror movies. It's a common theme in Fright Night. The boy who cried wolf didn't cry wolf.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a part of all literary works. I mean, Steve, isn't it a part of the hero's journey?
Yeah.
Redemption?
Yeah, exactly. The great Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey.
I was wondering if you would come up on this call.
Steve is a rather large fan of the Campbells.
Oh, yeah. I haven't read them in a long time, but I should go back. At any rate, and so to get a chance to be a part of something like that, where not only you're working with the cast was the creme de la creme of the classical British theater and film. It was life transforming in a lot of ways to get to embody that kind of thematic character in a piece that famous. Was a great time in my life.
The vibe I'm getting from you in these last few minutes is uplifting.
Well, yeah. Uplifting, but not necessarily happy ending.
No, but hopeful.
Yeah. I mean, hopeful in the sense that it gives you hope for mankind. That we're not all just venal creatures who are only interested in, it's all self-interest. That there are possibilities of there being great acts of courage and charity and empathy in our civilization, particularly now.
Yeah.
When we're seeing a lot of it sort of, kind of thrown by the wayside. So it's always existed.
Yeah.
And there are people, by the way, who believe, and if you look at it in a more objective way, who believe that there has never been a better time in human history for the largest number of people than now, despite the fact that we're facing perhaps climate catastrophe and war, and deep division, political division, that just in terms of people being able to eat and put a roof over their heads, that there's never been a better time in history. There are positives out there. I worry for my kids and particularly my grandchildren. I talk to my kids, and my kids say, "I'm not so worried. I'm worried for my kids. Mm-hmm. I'm worried for the next generation, not my generation."
I have a question, and I'm going to struggle to find the right words to say.
Yeah, sure.
This grasping for hope. I'm wondering if you feel that it's a response to something that you've seen externally in the world outside of yourself, or if it's a response to something internal.
I see it every day. I see it in, I have through my life sought out people who are in service because I honestly feel that despite the fact that, we think of actors as being narcissistic, that we are in service to something. We are in service to providing a mirror to people so that they can see themselves in a different way and perhaps come to a better understanding of themselves. And I have also, I'll give you an example. I just did a podcast with my ex-wife, Susan Sarandon. Mm-hmm. And Susan is a very well-known social activist who had just before the podcast that she and I did, we did a live podcast at a theater up here where I live. And she had just gotten arrested in Albany, New York for picketing with a group. And I'm ashamed to say that I can't remember the name of the group just at this very moment, but it's a group that represents restaurant workers.
Okay.
Primarily restaurant workers who are black and brown, because they're the ones who do the most menial jobs, who are exempt from laws that govern minimum wage. Mm-hmm. And so she was there protesting about a new law to raise the minimum wage in the state of New York, but that was exempting these restaurant workers because supposedly they also make tips.
Yes.
But generally speaking, most of them don't.
That old chestnut.
Yeah, exactly. So she got arrested, and the policeman who arrested her, because she was supposedly, quote unquote, obstructing justice, right? She was obstructing a walkway or something. But that's sort of what people who are well-known and who are social activists do. They go places to call attention to, because their presence calls attention to a particular cause. Mm-hmm. So they arrested Susan, among other people. And the guy who arrested her, she tells this story during the podcast. And she said the guy who arrested her, the policeman, was very nervous. And he said, I'm not quite sure what to say to you. I have to put you in handcuffs. She said, wait. She said to him, it's okay. You have to understand, you're helping us. You're helping us. What you're doing is not bad. It's okay because it's drawing attention to this problem. Mm-hmm. There are people like that in the world that I admire greatly. There are organizations in the world, Doctors Without Borders, trying to think of others. There's an organization called FINCA that makes loans to third world women to start their own businesses, microloans.
Yep.
There's an organization called Heifer that gives animals to people in third world countries so that they can start businesses raising the animals, breeding them, providing milk, providing eggs, whatever. And they're truly, selfless human beings around here,
Mhm.
believe it or not, that are doing great work that we don't hear about a lot.
I have heard quite a few of the things that you've talked about here. I've also worked in the restaurant business myself, so there's some commonality there.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about it earlier, but I did watch the interview that you did with Tom Holland, and there's a couple different things we could talk about there, but don't want to get tangential here. Last question. Is there anything that you've thought of that might be relevant that hasn't come up on the call, or did you think of something and then the conversation took a left turn and you didn't get a chance to say?
Well, hopefully we were making left turns constantly.
It does tend to happen on every show.
Yeah. Which is good. I find that with my podcast, same thing. I think I have a kind of direction. I've got sort of set questions that I ask people. It's about growing up around food. Because I grew up in a restaurant. My dad owned a restaurant. So I worked in my dad's restaurant for 8 years, 10 years before I went away to college. And the memories that we have been after in this particular conversation, we talk about them. I encourage everybody to explore their memory because we leave behind so little that's of importance.
Yeah.
In the big picture, but we leave behind a lot in the micro picture when it comes to our families and the people we love and those who love us.
The ripples.
Yeah, the ripples, and they happen. And that goes as far as, yesterday my wife and I went to a theater performance in New Jersey. A friend of ours had written a play that we wanted to go and see, and it was a wonderful, wonderful performance, a two-hander, that is two-character play. And as we pulled up, there was a guy drunk in the street.
Okay.
And he was just lying there.
Oh.
And suddenly, the community coalesced around him. A couple of people pulled up on bikes. Another guy stopped his car and got out of his car and went over to him. And they were all obviously people from the community. It was very clear that they were. And they helped the guy up. And they said, okay, come on. And I don't know, what they actually did with him, but there was an immediate reaction from the people who live in that area. And it's an area that is, it's not an upscale area at all. And I wonder if it would happen in an upscale area. Quite frankly,
probably not. No, I imagine he would just get overlooked and walked past.
Yeah,
often. That's quite wholesome.
They would call somebody else to deal with it.
Yeah, right.
And it's often what happens. I do the podcast, as I've mentioned several times, and I'm just going to do it until you guys are completely falling over from boredom. But it's called Cooking by Heart, and it has to do with the childhood memories I had around food. So I ask people whom I know, and I know a lot of people in show business and the music business, in the theater world. So that's where my primary sort of source of guests come from. But I also talk to my primary care physician, who's a nutritionist. I talk to a guy who's a federal judge who I went to college with because he has a very sort of interesting background in food. He's a gourmet cook. I just talked to a guy in Holland, in the Netherlands, who cooks with cannabis products.
Nice.
It's called high cuisine. He's a chef.
Appropriate.
Yeah, but it's brilliant the stuff that he does. But he again talks about growing up and what it was like going into a McDonald's and throwing some magic mushrooms on a Big Mac. We all have stories, and I just I encourage your audience to follow your own. To go back and, tell your kids about things that happened when you were young.
Yeah. Make your own stories.
Yeah. Exactly.
Is that thunder?
Yes. It's
by you,
quite
Chris?
hard over here.
Where are you guys?
I'm in Florida. Steve's in Ohio.
Yeah. I've moved around quite a bit, but I used to live in Florida, and then I currently moved it to Ohio for work. Live in Chicago, Milwaukee, Philly, Jersey, Florida.
Around.
Yes. Been around. Well, we appreciate your time. It was a pleasant conversation. Excellent stuff. I am going to get with you offline to follow up, get some pictures that we can use for slideshow, get a bio, and put together a bio page on our website, all that good stuff.
Oh, great.
I'll just do a closing here. Thank you to anybody out there listening. Please do come visit us at horrormakesусhappy.com. Can support us on Patreon or just tell a friend.